Imagine this. You're sitting in a quiet room alone. The door is closed, the light is soft, and there is nothing to distract you. No phone, no clock, no one watching. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, you're utterly still. Then it begins. Not a sound, but a presence. A subtle unease like someone entered the room without opening the door. It lives behind your chest and watches from beneath your thoughts. You try to ignore it, shift your posture, breathe deeply. But the silence has turned thick now, heavy with something unspoken. And in that silence, a strange realization emerges. You are not alone inside your own mind. There is something else in there, something you don't fully understand, something you didn't choose, something that seems to know you far too well. It surfaces in the way you sabotage your own progress, how you lash out in moments of shame, how you shrink from opportunities you deeply desire. It speaks in the voice of fear, of inadequacy, of rage. You call it anxiety, you call it procrastination, you call it a bad mood or a rough patch. But what if it's a war? Not a war outside you, but one beneath the surface. A civil war within your psyche between the self you show the world and the one you buried long ago. Between who you are and who you're afraid you might be. Carl Jung called this the confrontation with the shadow. The meeting point between consciousness and the unconscious, where all the things you've exiled, your suppressed instincts, hidden desires, shameful memories, unspoken fears, gather not to disappear but to wait. And they are patient. They appear in your dreams wearing strange disguises. They show up in your relationships, contorting your reactions. They hijack your emotions when you're triggered and whisper destructive things when you're most vulnerable. And just when you think you've mastered yourself, they remind you, you don't know who you are yet. Here's the paradox. You spend your life trying to become someone better, stronger, happier, more successful. You build an identity, curate your values, manage your image. You craft a narrative that makes sense. But all the while, something else is watching, a darker twin that remembers everything you tried to forget. And it's not just inside you, it's in everyone. Every saint has a shadow. Every villain has a wound. Every hero you admire has wrestled in silence with their own hidden self. So here's the great question. What if your greatest suffering isn't caused by the world around you, but by the part of yourself you've refused to face? What if the habits you call bad are actually defense mechanisms, rituals of avoidance, meant to keep you from confronting the buried self beneath the mask? What if your anxiety is the alarm bell of a neglected truth, screaming to be acknowledged? What if the very things you fear in others, cruelty, weakness, selfishness, are unrecognized traits of your own nature, projected outward so you never have to own them? And what if the key to your liberation isn't self-improvement, but self-confrontation? Jung believed that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. That means every recurring conflict, every emotion you can't control, every time you wonder why does this keep happening to me, it might not be the universe being cruel. It might be your shadow trying to speak. But few dare to listen, because to listen is to admit that you are not one but many. That beneath the social mask and personal affirmations lies a more ancient self, one that remembers the primitive, the violent, the jealous, the terrified, the obsessive, one that contradicts your values and disturbs your peace. And yet without it, you are incomplete. So you must ask, have you ever truly looked into your own darkness without flinching? Have you ever questioned whether your moral compass is guided by truth or fear of your own nature? What happens to the parts of ourselves that we refuse to name? Do they die, or do they wait, feeding off denial, growing stronger in exile? The longer you avoid them, the more power they gain, because what you repress doesn't disappear, it only retreats. And there, in the depths of your unconscious, it becomes mythic, a force with its own will, its own logic, and its own hunger. And if you never face it, then the war will go on forever, unseen, unnamed, but always felt. In your anxiety, in your depression, in your envy, your fear, your rage, your numbing routines, and in the dreams you never dare to chase. But if you do face it, then something unimaginable becomes possible, not just healing, but wholeness. A psychic alchemy that turns conflict into clarity and darkness into depth. And that's where we must go next. Because now you've heard the footsteps of the shadow. Now you know the battle is real. But what is this hidden adversary? Where does it come from, and why does it matter so much? That answer lies deeper, beneath the stories you've told yourself, beneath the skin of your culture, beneath the very structure of your mind. And that's exactly where we're going next. There is a cruel irony in the architecture of the human psyche. The very parts of ourselves we most need to understand are the ones we are most determined to avoid. This is not a modern flaw. It's not the byproduct of social media, parenting styles, or cultural conditioning, though all of these amplify it. It is something ancient, something wired into the way consciousness evolved. From the moment humans became self-aware, we began a dangerous double game. To build a cohesive self, we had to deny the chaos that threatened it. And so the fragmentation began. Carl Jung saw this with terrifying clarity. In his view, the human personality is not a singular entity, but a constellation of selves, some illuminated by consciousness, others hidden in shadow. At the center is the ego, the mask we wear, the story we tell, the persona we project into the world. The ego believes it is the whole. It speaks in the language of identity. I am kind. I am rational. I am not like them. But the ego is not the truth. It is a coping strategy, a survival mechanism forged through years of conditioning and conformity, and what it cannot integrate, it represses. This repression is not passive, it is strategic. From childhood, we learn which emotions earn us love, which thoughts are acceptable, which instincts will be punished. A child who cries too much learns to hide their sadness. A boy punished for anger learns to bury his fire. A girl mocked for being too loud learns to shrink into silence. These fragments don't vanish, they descend. And what descends becomes shadow. Jung defined the shadow as the unconscious part of the personality that the conscious ego does not identify with. It's not just the bad things, it's the rejected, the unacceptable, the unassimilated. Sometimes that's aggression or sexuality. Sometimes it's creativity, power, or even joy. Anything the ego deems threatening or incompatible with its ideal image is exiled into the unconscious. But the unconscious does not forget. It watches, it waits. It shapes your dreams, your impulses, your reactions. It slips into the way you speak when you're drunk, the way you lash out in arguments, the things you fear in others. And the more you try to suppress it, the more distorted it becomes. Repression breeds monstrosity. Friedrich Nietzsche once wrote, "Be careful when you cast out your demons that you do not cast out the best thing in you." He understood the paradox. Our so-called dark side is not just where our sins live, it's where our vitality lives, our instincts, our hunger for life, our capacity for rebellion, passion, authenticity. The same force that drives destruction also fuels creation. That is the central problem of the modern self. We've been taught to amputate the parts of ourselves that don't fit the narrative. But when you disown your inner contradictions, you don't become pure, you become hollow. A shell, a walking mask terrified of what might crawl out if it ever cracks. Arthur Schopenhauer, the German philosopher who inspired both Nietzsche and Jung, believed that beneath the surface of rational man is a primal force he called the will, an irrational, blind, striving energy that animates all life. We do not choose what we desire, desire chooses us. We do not control the will, at best we barely understand it. To Jung, this will show up in dreams, symbols, compulsions, and when it goes unrecognized, it becomes what he called a complex, an emotionally charged cluster of thoughts and memories that exerts power over our behavior, often without us knowing. Have you ever felt consumed by jealousy and then wondered, where did that even come from? Have you ever sabotaged something good and then whispered, I don't know why I did that? That's the shadow, pulling strings from the basement of your mind. The problem then is not the shadow itself. It is your relationship to it. The more you deny it, the more it governs you. And not just you, entire cultures are built on this denial. Societies repress collective shadows the same way individuals do. Jean-Paul Sartre, the existentialist philosopher, argued that much of human anguish stems from what he called bad faith, the denial of one's freedom and responsibility in favor of comforting illusions. We pretend we are who we are supposed to be. We act roles. We suppress the parts of us that contradict the script we were handed. This is why so many people feel a vague, chronic sense of inauthenticity, why they become anxious without knowing why even success feels hollow. It's because their life is curated by their ego's fear of collapse, not their soul's hunger for wholeness. And here is where Jung's work becomes a psychological map back to the real. He argued that the goal of life is not perfection, but individuation, the process of becoming whole by integrating all parts of the self, including the shadow, not eliminating it, but listening to it, not fearing it but understanding it. It is a terrifying task, because to confront your shadow is to confront everything you've denied about yourself. Your pettiness, your selfishness, your cruelty, but also your brilliance, your sensuality, your ability to defy convention. It is a return to psychological adulthood where you take responsibility not just for what you've done, but for who you are deep down behind the performance. That is the hidden battle within. Not between good and evil, but between truth and illusion. Between the ego's desperate need to maintain a false unity and the soul's deeper longing for integration. And this battle doesn't play out in grand gestures. It plays out in silence, in the choices you make when no one is watching, in how you treat the parts of yourself you don't understand, in how much truth you can tolerate in a single moment without collapsing. But if you still think this is just about your inner world, think again. Because the consequences of this hidden war ripple outward, into relationships, into politics, into the very fabric of society. That's what we must explore next. You wake up each day believing you are making choices, that your decisions, what to say, who to trust, what to pursue, are freely made. But what if that freedom is an illusion? What if, beneath the surface of your consciousness, there are unseen hands guiding every action you take? And what if those hands are yours? This is the terrifying consequence of the unintegrated self. The shadow you refuse to face does not sleep. It steers your life in ways you can barely detect. It chooses your friends. It shapes your taste. It seduces you into careers, relationships, and belief systems, not for your fulfillment, but for your safety. The safety of the ego, the safety of never having to change. But that safety comes at a cost, your freedom. Modern neuroscience echoes what Jung intuited long ago. Most of your decisions are made before you are even aware of them. Studies in cognitive science reveal that the brain begins to act milliseconds, sometimes seconds, before the conscious mind becomes aware of its decision. The self you think is in control is often just a narrator, making up stories to explain what your unconscious has already chosen. And that unconscious is not neutral. It is filled with old wounds, unspoken fears, inherited beliefs. It remembers every rejection, every failure, every humiliation you buried instead of feeling. It builds invisible maps of what is safe and dangerous, often based not on reality, but on past pain. Then it hides those maps in your behavior. That's why you overthink that message before you send it. That's why you always choose the familiar job over the risky passion. That's why you feel drained after every interaction with people you pretend to like. The shadow writes your rules while pretending it doesn't exist. And what about relationships? Think of the patterns, the arguments that repeat with eerie similarity, the way you're drawn to certain types of people over and over, the sabotage that strikes just when things are going well. These are not coincidences. They are unconscious contracts forged by your shadow, pulling you toward scenarios that mirror unresolved conflicts. Why? Because the shadow is not content to stay buried. It demands to be seen, even if only through destruction. You're not choosing chaos, you're reliving it. Psychologists call this repetition compulsion, the tendency to recreate trauma until it is finally confronted. But most people don't confront it. They rationalize it. They blame others. They search for answers everywhere but within. So the cycle continues, and the longer it continues, the more bitter and fragmented they become. This is why so many grow old without ever growing whole. Now extend this beyond the individual. When an entire culture disowns its shadow, it doesn't vanish. It becomes projected. That projection takes many forms: demonization of outsiders, scapegoating of minorities, mass hysteria, moral crusades that mask deeper hypocrisy. Look at history. Genocides begin not with monsters, but with frightened people desperate to preserve their identity. The same mechanism that causes you to reject your own dark traits causes groups to reject anything that threatens their collective ego. We are good. They are evil. It's the ego's last defense before collapse, to find an external enemy that justifies internal fear. Carl Jung observed this on a massive scale in Nazi Germany. He warned that when societies do not recognize their collective shadow, it bursts forth in terrifying forms: dictatorships, propaganda, war. The totalitarian state is not merely a political structure. It is the externalization of a mass psyche gripped by fear and fragmentation. And it's not just history, it's now. Our culture is built on denial. The denial of death, the denial of failure, the denial of vulnerability. We chase constant stimulation, scrolling, binging, consuming, not because we are curious, but because we are running. Running from the unbearable silence in which the shadow speaks. We glorify productivity while privately crumbling from burnout. We praise freedom of speech, but cancel those who make us uncomfortable. We speak of unity while bathing in division. We preach authenticity but reward performance. Our society has mastered the art of appearing whole, while remaining profoundly fractured. This creates a culture of psychological exile. People don't just hide parts of themselves, they begin to doubt their own sanity. They feel things they're told they shouldn't feel. They want things they're told are wrong. They suffer in ways that have no name in the DSM, no cure in a bottle, no quick fix in a podcast. So what do? They turn inward but not in reflection. In shame, they pathologize themselves. They call their intuition crazy. They medicate their grief. They spiritualize their repression. They perform joy and call it healing. All the while, their shadow waits not to destroy them but to be reconciled. But here's the cruelest twist. The more we suppress, the more we become controlled by what we suppress. What we don't make conscious, we project. What we won't feel, we act out. What we fear in ourselves, we persecute in others. And the consequences are everywhere. In the workplace, where people trade authenticity for approval. In families, where children inherit their parents' shame. In politics, where ideology masks unprocessed rage. In mental health systems, where symptoms are treated but roots are ignored. In love, where people mistake codependence for connection. We are living in a world where people are starving for wholeness, but addicted to fragmentation. This is the trap. This is the labyrinth, not of minotaurs, but of mirrors. Every time you turn away from your reflection, the labyrinth deepens. But if you stop, if you truly look, the mirror becomes a doorway. And that is the turning point. The shadow is not your enemy. It is your buried inheritance, your lost power, your gateway to transformation. But to claim it, you must first recognize how deeply its absence has shaped your life. Only then can you begin the rebellion. It doesn't begin with a scream. No triumphant epiphany, no lightning strike of clarity. Just a moment, quiet, almost invisible, where you stop running. You sit with the discomfort. You turn inward not to analyze but to witness. And then something shifts. You feel it. A subtle rebellion, not against the world but against the narrative, the one you've been feeding yourself for years. I am this, I am not that. I could never, I would never, I must always. Lies, every one of them born not from truth, but from fear. To break free from the secret battle within, you must commit an act of inner insurrection. The deliberate and radical integration of your shadow, not suppression, not destruction, integration. Carl Jung did not want people to become perfect. He wanted them to become whole. He believed that healing was not about eliminating the darkness, but about bringing it into dialogue with the light. The path is not upward. It is downward, inward, into the depths of the self, where the most frightening truths lie buried beneath the rubble of avoidance. The first step is to stop pretending you know who you are. You are not just your thoughts. You are not just your past. You are not your job, your image, your trauma, your talents. You are a living paradox, a dance between opposites, light and dark, noble and animal, divine and wounded. So who are you really? The shadow knows, and it will reveal it if you have the courage to ask. Step 1, radical self-honesty. This is not the diluted version of honesty you use to appear humble. This is the kind of honesty that shatters mirrors. It requires that you admit what you've denied, confess what you've hidden, name what you fear most. It is standing naked before the raw truth of your being and saying, "This is also me." Think of the things you judge most in others. Arrogance, neediness, weakness, manipulation. Those judgments are mirrors, projections of the traits you've exiled in yourself. Jung taught that what we condemn in others reveals what we most fear in ourselves. So the next time you feel triggered, don't look outward, look in. What part of you is asking to be seen? Step 2, make the unconscious conscious. Your shadow lives in your dreams, your slips of the tongue, your obsessions, your sudden emotions that make no sense. These are not accidents. They are messages from the underground. Dream journaling, active imagination, a Jungian method of engaging with inner images, and inner dialogue are tools to meet the shadow where it lives. Speak to it. Draw it. Let it speak back. Ask, what do you want from me? What are you protecting? What would happen if I let you in? This is not play acting. This is psychological alchemy, the transformation of hidden psychic material into gold. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, Jung said, but by making the darkness conscious. Step 3, stop performing, start being. The world rewards masks. It celebrates personas that are polished, consistent, easy to understand. But the soul suffocates in performance. The rebellion is this: become real, even if it means being contradictory, messy, uncertain. This may cost you. Some relationships won't survive your authenticity. Some roles will dissolve. Some illusions will collapse. But in their place, something extraordinary grows: intimacy. Real connection, not based on who you pretend to be, but on who you truly are, even in your shadows. Step 4, reclaim your disowned power. The shadow doesn't only hold your flaws, it holds your brilliance. How many times have you said, "That's just not me," when deep down you wanted it to be? How often have you avoided conflict to seem kind, or rejected ambition to appear humble? These are not virtues, they are disguises. They often hide fear of your own magnitude. The rebellion is reclaiming that power, reclaiming your anger as clarity, your desire as vitality, your ambition as sacred fire. These aren't sins, they are tools when integrated. When exiled, they become weapons, but when embraced, they become fuel for growth, for creation, for change. Historical echoes of the rebellion. Nietzsche spoke of the Übermensch, the one who transcends herd morality and creates meaning from within. This wasn't about arrogance, it was about psychological sovereignty. The Übermensch doesn't need to be told who to be. He dives into the chaos of his instincts and emerges reborn. Gabor Mate, in studying addiction, found that what society labels as weakness is often a desperate adaptation to trauma. Addictions, compulsions, rage, they are not moral failures. They are attempts to soothe unbearable truths that the conscious mind refuses to face. Jung himself underwent a spiritual descent after his split with Freud. He faced hallucinations, visions, dialogues with inner figures. Instead of pathologizing these, he engaged them. He mined his own madness, and from it he gave birth to some of the most groundbreaking insights in psychology. These were not men of comfort, they were men of confrontation, and their path was not upward but downward, into shadow, into soul, into the parts of humanity that polite society tells us to fear. And yet, those are the very parts from which transformation is born. Step 5, live the myth. You are not a statistic, not a machine, not a brand. You are a myth unfolding in real time. The ancient myths were not stories about gods on mountaintops. They were symbolic maps of the psyche. The hero's journey is your journey. The descent into the underworld is your descent, into pain, grief, shame, and the treasure you bring back is not perfection. It's wholeness. The final act of rebellion is to live your life as if it matters, to treat your inner world with reverence, to know that every emotion, every fear, every contradiction within you is not a problem to be fixed, but a mystery to be lived. This is not about healing so you can return to being normal. This is about awakening so you can finally be real. And yes, it will hurt. Truth always does at first. But eventually, it will feel like breathing again after years underwater. So here you are, on the edge of the battle. One self wants to remain asleep. The other is ready to awaken. The door is open. The shadow is waiting. And the only question left is, will you walk through?